Welcome back. So in the last lecture, we looked at this particular relationship for finding the lead time demand variance or standard deviation. And basically, we looked at it in terms of the demand variation impact on lead time plus the lead time variation impact on demand. So if we look at it in a more intuitive way, basically it's just these two factors which are represented in this particular relationship. So in a typical case, you would have your variance on the lead time side. Lead time side will be minimized because essentially you would have things like service level agreements with your suppliers, which would make the variance in terms of lead time to be minimum. So a typical case involves that we assume that the lead time standard deviation is approximately 0, and if you plug this value in here, so this term will go away and we would be left with this term, and then the relationship would basically be simply, so it will be simply the sigma, or the standard deviation of demand, times the square root of LT. And hence, to find the safety stock, we just would need to take this factor and multiply it with our constant for the service level, which we saw in the earlier lecture. So that will be Z times sigma LTD, which would be equal to Z. And for a typical case, let's say this case, this is going to be Z times sigma of D, which is your standard deviation of your demand times square root of lead time. So essentially what this formula is saying, it is saying that my safety stock is essentially depending on the variance in demand and as well as the mean of my lead time. So it's obviously as a square root, the relationship, but if we just look at it in terms of the overall relationship between LT and SS, safety stock and lead time. So essentially this is what it's saying. So basically, if my if the mean or the average lead time increases, I would need to stock more items. Similarly, if my variance in demand increases, I would need to have more safety stock. And this is just a constant, let's say, we use to have a confidence level that our safety stock will meet the variance. And once we understand the safety stock concept, the reorder level is, or the reorder point is basically just the product of your lead time average times your demand average. So let's say this is lead time average times your demand plus your safety stock. And so your reorder level is taking into the account the variation we have discussed in this part, any sort of forecasting variation in demand which would arise based on the standard deviation of demand, as well as the average lead time and demand product. So therefore, if there is any sort of variation in the process, or if our forecast for demand is way off, there is more error, our figures for ROL will also be impacted. So we have looked at some of the core concepts of inventory. We have looked at the reorder level, the EOQ or the reorder point, reorder quantity, as well as the safety stock, lead time demand, and the variations in lead time and the variations in demand. Now moving forward, there are two more concepts which are relatively important in inventory. So the first one is the service level, and basically this is just the probability that we would have a stock out in a certain cycle. So for example, we looked at this particular chart of the inventory levels, and as I mentioned, there can be scenarios where this level goes below zero, so there is a stock out basically. And this is the service level is just the probability that there will be a stock out, or um, the level will go below, let's say, what is required, below zero, let's say. And fill rate, another important concept, is basically how much orders can we meet from our current inventory. So these concepts are sort of related. And service level typically for a good inventory is around 90 to 95%. And the relationship between service level, which is the probability of having not a stock out, and the cost is something like this. So for example, as the service level increases, so let's say this is 95%, the cost impact on our inventory will also increase. So this has to be basically optimized based on your business requirements. So if the business requires you to have a 95% service level, you should optimize your inventory in such a way that you achieve this value, at the same time minimize your cost.